Hold to the episode of the Gaming Memories Podcast. You know the drill. Your host, The Prophet. I have been commended by the gaming gods themselves, even Miyamoto, the Father, Kojima, the Son, and Carmack, the motherfucking Holy Ghost, to restore the one true gaming podcast simply by interviewing creative and interesting people about their favorite gaming memories growing up. And today we are doing as the Lord hath commanded. And my creative and interesting guest is, drumroll please, Dave from Tales from the Backlog. Which is self-described as a video game podcast where Dave Jackson and guests break down and discuss the games they play. Each episode looks at one game in depth, focusing on mechanics, story, music, and other aspects, with no spoilers until a clearly marked spoiler wall in the middle of the episode. He recently covered Lost Odyssey, recently covered Final Fantasy IV, old games, new games, Animal Well, Pony Island, and my personal favorite episode, because I am oh so humble and not biased at all, is I was on an episode talking about Metal Gear Solid 2. So check that out. Anyway, that's it. Dave Jackson is the host of a really good podcast. I am a Patreon, full disclosure. So obviously I'm a fan, and all around I enjoy his content. So maybe you will too. That is it. Other than that, make sure to spread the good news of the gaming gospel, and ye shall be blessed. I say these things in the name of me, one of the Father, Kojima, the Son, and Carmack, the Holy Ghost. Amen. And enjoy the show. Welcome, David Thin. I had a good time on your podcast. I'm sure the intro will talk about that. We talked about some Metal Gear.
Yeah, that was a really fun episode, and I got a bunch of really good responses from Metal Gear Solid fans about our conversation there.
It was really fun, so I was like, let's have some more fun and have you on the show. For those of you who may not know who Dave is, Dave, would you please introduce yourself and where people can find you on the old interwebs?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. I'm the host of Tales from the Backlog. It's a weekly gaming deep dive review type podcast where every episode is me with a different guest talking about a game that I played. A lot of times it is not necessarily retro stuff, but, you know, a year or two, or in the case of Metal Gear Solid, 23 years old or something like that. So I got a pretty big range of games that I do, but the key thing is it's mostly stuff that I've had for a while, and I'm just looking to play those games I've collected. So every episode we do the deep dive, we do no spoilers for a while. After we warn people about spoilers, we do the full spoiler discussion. So people can jump out if they want, or they can continue on. So that's, again, Tales from the Backlog.
What's been your favorite episode to date?
Oh, dude, I was not prepared for that question. Well, like, you know, flattery will get you everywhere, they say. So the Metal Gear Solid 2 episode was a really, really fun conversation, because that game has a lot of stuff to talk about. And one of my favorite things is when I get a guest on the show that is ready to dive into that stuff. And you most certainly were. So that was a really fun one. I've recently done some that are coming out soon that I thought were really great. One about Devotion, which is that Taiwanese horror game that the CCP got mad about, and it got taken off of Steam and stuff like that. But the story is crazy. It's very Silent Hill inspired. So that was a really good conversation too. Off the top of my head, I'll just say those two. So one in the past, one in the future for people to look forward to.
Is there any rhyme behind the reason on how you choose the game? I think you do polls sometime, if I'm not mistaken?
I do. Yeah, polls on Patreon. So once a month, one game a month is a Patreon poll game. So some patrons can submit the games for the polls. So those are like completely out of my hands. Otherwise, I'll just put together 4 games I'm thinking about playing and people can pick. Most of them it's some combination of, I have this, I want to play it, I find a guest who also wants to talk about it. So I usually line up game and guest matching before I start playing, or like very early on, once I realize like I actually do want to play this whole thing, do the podcast, I'll find a guest. So it's a couple of moving parts that have to line up, but it's usually easy enough to find someone who wants to talk about a certain game.
Yeah. And what platform, like if the game is multi-platform, What is your preferred platform to play on right now?
Nowadays, I really like playing Steam because I have a nice PC and I have a Steam Deck. I like to be able to switch between those two things, and certain types of games I love playing on Steam Deck, RPGs, indie games, puzzle games, stuff like that. Those are Steam Deck games. The more action games and things like that, I'll either play on the PC or on PS5. Those are my preferred.
What kind of GPU you running?
3080 Ti, I think, is
Ooh,
the suffix there. Yeah.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah. Got a nice pre-built a while ago. And so
Okay,
the
where'd you get it from?
Micro Center. The hope was just like I just walked into Micro Center and I was like, I want to buy a PC that I will not have to open up except to clean for a long time. And that was what I came out with.
Yeah, dude, a 3080 Ti build is fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
super solid card.
Oh yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, what year were you born?
88. Remember you asked when we did that Metal Gear Solid 2 episode as a little tease. So 88.
88. Did I try to guess your first console on that episode?
You did. Yeah, and you were very wrong. So you can try and guess again.
Yes, I don't remember, so this is good. So all I know is my first intuition is going to be wrong. And 88 puts you, so around 85, I think was the NES in North America.
Mm-hmm.
I probably would have guessed NES, so I'm not going to guess NES.
Smart.
Oh, but was it a handheld?
It was a handheld.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what usually messes me up. So it's going to be, is it a Game Boy Color?
No. I think that would have been the third or fourth game thing that I owned.
Really?
Older.
88? So 80.
I mean, I wasn't playing games when I was 3. So
I know, that's why I'm like, okay, it was,
think outside of Nintendo.
you didn't have, there's no way you had a Game Gear. There's
The
no
Game Gear was the first
Really?
one. Yeah. Yep.
Wow, that's so rare. I had a Game Gear too, but it's just, I don't know the exact numbers. I should look them up. I'm pretty sure the Game Boy just annihilated Game
Oh,
Gear.
I'm sure it
itself.
did, but yeah, the Game Gear was my first one, and I don't think I asked for it. I think I just like got it for Christmas or something like that because my parents got a tip from somebody that kids like the Game Gear or something.
Bro, the Game Gear. I remember going on road trips and packing like 30 extra batteries.
Oh yeah, you don't have room to take you don't have room to take extra shirts because you got to bring batteries.
And I believe, if memory serves, it's 3 batteries on each side. 6 total, right?
Yeah, it was a lot of batteries. Yeah, that's why the screen is so small because like half of the size of that console is just battery storage.
Yep. And I played a ton of Sonic on that. It's so long ago. I can't remember if it was like a dumbed down. I'm sure it was a dumbed down version, but wasn't there a version of Streets of Rage on the Game Gear?
That's a good question because I was not playing Streets of Rage in the mid 90s. I also had Sonic, and I remember not being able to beat the first couple. I mean, I could beat like the first couple levels, but not much beyond that. The only things I remember playing were I had a baseball game, which I can't remember what it is. I just remember the Cleveland Indians were really good, mid 90s. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie game. I played that. That was my shit because I was like 7 or 8 or something like that, and I loved the Power Rangers.
The Power Rangers, man. Did you watch? So there was the Power Rangers, and then there was, I think it's called VR Troopers, was like one of the spin-offs. Did you ever do that?
The Power Rangers went in so many different directions over time, but I stopped watching them in like the late 90s. Like basically when Pokemon came out, I stopped watching Power Rangers. So I'm not familiar with anything except I know it was like in space and a bunch of other weird stuff.
Did you migrate over to Pokemon after that and get into that?
Oh yeah, yeah. So like after the Game Gear, the next thing I had was a Game Boy Pocket when Pokemon Red came out. It was that Christmas in 98. We got those. Smaller original Game Boy, and it had an actual like black and white screen, not the monochrome from the original Game Boy, not the green.
Not the green. Yes, I do remember one of these. I don't know if I ever had one, but I have vague memories of a friend having one because some of the ones I'm looking up for those who are just listening, there's a Game Boy Pocket that's translucent.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember a friend having one of those, and I thought it was super dope. And there's also a black one, and I remember coveting the black one as well.
I
Yeah.
think I might be confusing the pockets that we had with the Game Boy Colors that we had, but I think I had a blue Game Boy Pocket. The crazy one that I remember is there was a kid from Japan who went to school with us, and he had a Game Boy Light. So we were all over there with our Game Boy Pockets, and he had a Game Boy Light, which was Japan only, and it had a backlight in it. Which was crazy to us back at the time because Nintendo didn't figure out backlights until like 2004 or something like that.
That's interesting because I was just about to bring up one of my most fond or frustrating memories is trying to find enough darkness and the right lighting conditions to play
Yeah.
the Game Boy, depending on where I was at and where I was playing.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought, or not I, my parents at some point bought that light attachment
Yeah, the worm light
that hooks onto the Game Boy.
or like the thing that went over the screen.
It went over the screen. So
Yeah, we
I'm
had
looking-
those too.
Okay. And it looks like there's two versions. There's like a squiggly adjustable thing, and then I had it was like an attachment that just sat over the screen. It was very
Yeah, you could get some that had like magnifiers on them
Yes.
too. Yeah, I remember those.
obviously Pokemon was massive for anyone in that generation for us on
Mhm.
Game Boy. So do you play red and blue or just red at the time?
I had red, my brother had blue. Then we both got yellow, I think, when the Game Boy Color came out or something like that. Yeah. But on the game, because the Game Boy was cool too, because like I got a Game Boy in 98 and the Game Boy had been out forever by that point. So there's a bunch of other games like Link's Awakening was another one we played a ton back then. Tetris and Mario Land 2 and then Super Mario Brothers on the Game Boy Color. But I think those were like the big ones, Mario Land 2 and Link's Awakening, other than Pokemon. But it was mostly Pokemon, if we're being honest. Like we look at our count, mostly Pokemon.
Yeah. I mean, Pokemon was just a cultural phenomenon. It is what
Yeah.
it is. I'm not a huge fan of it now. I did play red and blue, and then I completely fell off all Pokemon after that. I did try, is it Stadium on the 64 where you
Yeah.
battle? I think I tried a little bit of Stadium, played around with Pokemon Snap on the 64, but
Mm-hmm.
red and blue, were you a degenerate and did you use the rare candy trick
Oh yeah,
like
of
a
course.
cheater? Of course you were.
We used the rare candy trick and we had a Game Shark. And I can't remember if we used the Game Shark on red and blue, but we definitely Game Sharked the fuck out of gold and silver.
No console at this point in 98, still only handhelds?
Nope, just handhelds. First console that you hook up to the TV was the N64 in 99.
So you went from Game Gear, but never did Genesis?
No,
Completely
I
skipped
never
all
owned
that?
another Sega thing after the Game Gear.
Odd.
Nothing at
path.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, like it's weird because I think we wanted Pokemon because it was like getting popular at school or something, or like my parents heard about it. So we got Game Boys. And then everything after that, we were obsessed with Pokemon for like at least the next 5 years. Like until the Game Boy Advance, basically, I was obsessed with Pokemon. Sega didn't have Pokemon, so I didn't care about Sega at all.
Yeah.
I thought I liked Sonic. As I said, I was like not good at it or anything. That was not enough to get me to like ask for a Genesis or a Dreamcast or something like that.
It's interesting. The pattern I've noticed with myself and the vast majority of guests I've interviewed is the handheld follows the console.
Mhm.
So if you were a Nintendo kid, you got a Game Boy. If you were a Sega kid, you got a Game Gear because you were, say, if it was Sega and myself, I was familiar with Sonic, and my parents were like, well, how can he play Sonic in the car and we'll shut the fuck up while we're driving
Yeah.
somewhere? Oh, we got to get in this Game Gear thing. It has Sonic on it.
Uh-huh.
Right? And then I ended up getting a Game Gear. And
Yeah.
I've noticed that like it's usually console first and then they end up getting into handhelds. It's interesting because you went handheld first and never did the console associated with that handheld.
Yeah, not until the N64, but then after that, we owned every Nintendo system until the only Nintendo system I've never owned is a Wii. But I did have a DS during that time. So like we always had the Game Boy Advance and the GameCube and the Game Boy and the N64. Because, again, Pokemon and like Mario Golf and Mario Tennis and stuff, but they had like you could do like the transfer pack and put your stuff on the console, which we thought was really cool. But it really was like we just loved everything Nintendo did. So we had no reason to want whatever Sega was doing. It was like, I'm sure we would have had fun if we had a Dreamcast or had a PlayStation, but we just loved Nintendo too much.
That's what I was just going to say. You started out as a Game Gear, but you really became a Nintendo kid.
Yeah, for sure. The first thing non-Nintendo we had was the original Xbox. We had a PlayStation 1 for a very short time, but we were playing the Nintendo stuff, and I think our parents sold it to buy whatever the next Nintendo thing was, I'm sure.
Now, at this time, like in 98, when you had the handhelds, you were obsessed with Pokemon.
Yeah.
Did you identify as a gamer, or was it basically just Pokemon and then you did other hobbies?
Definitely other hobbies. Like I played sports and stuff when I was that age. It wasn't just Pokemon. Like I said, we got into Zelda, especially when we had the N64 and we played Ocarina of Time. We got into Zelda and GoldenEye and, the big N64 games. We played all of those, Smash Brothers and Mario Kart, all that stuff. So like I played a lot of games, but we spent a lot of time playing outside with the kids in our neighborhood too. Sometimes we played video games with them, but we played basketball and football and stuff outside too. So I would say gaming was my favorite thing to do when I was at home for sure. But it wasn't like every day is just gaming for either. We definitely played a lot outside.
So did I. I should just reframe that question. When and what game, when you started identifying as, I'm so much of a gamer, maybe in the future I'm going to start a podcast about gaming. Look, I'm
Well,
I'm a gamer.
In 1996, I was definitely thinking about making a podcast in the future. Yeah. No, I don't think there was any like concept of that because there's like that stigma that I think a lot of people felt about playing games in the 90s. I wasn't into like PC gaming. So if I was playing Baldur's Gate in 1999 or something, maybe I would have felt more of a stigma for people like thinking that's too nerdy or whatever for the times. But everyone was playing Pokemon. Everyone was playing Zelda. At least in my friend group, the people that I cared about, everybody loved all of those games. So there was no difference between being a gamer or not. It was just everyone was playing Mario Kart or Smash Brothers or Pokemon. So, I mean, especially Pokemon back then, like with our age group, if you weren't playing Pokemon, you were the not cool one. Like the cool kids all played Pokemon at recess and stuff and at school.
Where part of the country did you grow up in?
Ohio.
Okay. You're only 3 years younger than me.
Yeah.
And that definitely was not the experience. Now, I grew up in Utah, and which is a very like sheltered economy and culture. This is hyper religious. I grew up in Utah County, so I didn't meet anyone who wasn't Mormon until I was like 20.
Yeah.
Didn't even know.
Very, very different. Yeah, for sure.
And video games I think in a lot of Christian cultures, but at least in Mormon culture, there was a huge stigma that it's a waste of time and it's bad for your brain.
Oh, yeah.
So I did not have that experience. Like if you were playing Pokemon, you were a nerd and you got made fun of for sure.
Yeah. I think it was like kind of like you said with, your parents getting you the Game Gear so you would play Sonic and you would like just be quiet for some time, right?
Yeah.
I think it was probably like that for a lot of kids with Pokemon, where Pokemon was so big. And like think about the age range that Pokemon is made for, right? Pokemon's made for like kids between the age of 10 and 14 primarily, right? That's how old I was when Pokemon came out. I was 10. I was 11. Like we were right in the pocket for Pokemon, in the right age. And, we had like the means to buy video games too, which helps for sure.
Definitely. It was a cultural phenomena. The reason I asked about the gaming thing is I definitely didn't have the lexicon, like call myself a gamer, I'm going to do a podcast. But I knew that video games were one of the things that excited me the most. I did play sports, I wrestled, played soccer. But if I went to a friend's house or I met a new friend, I wasn't excited to see what kind of wrestling shoes he had or soccer balls he had. Mm-hmm. Oh, your dad has a PC? What fucking games do you have? That's all I care about, right? I loved video games, and any video game I could get my hand on from the very beginning. Obviously, when you're young and you don't have money, you just sort of just play what you can get a hold of and what your friends have. Mm-hmm. But I want to skip forward a little bit and we can kind of come back. When did you decide to do the podcast and why?
Ooh, I decided to do the podcast in 2021, I think. Yeah, 2021, because we're coming up on 3 years of it right now. Because I started my other podcast, which we still do. It's a top three list podcast. We started like so many people during the pandemic when podcasting suddenly you could do it on, it was called Anchor back then, but Spotify for podcasters now, you could do it for free. You just download an app, you hit the record button. It's super easy. So once I figured out it was that easy, we decided to start doing that. And then once I got to grips with like how to edit audio, how to upload the show, just basically how it works to run a podcast, I started to think about like, what do I really like talking about? Like I like doing, jokes and top three lists with my friends, but is there something I really want to talk about? And video game like critique was something I wanted to try because I was super inspired by my favorite gaming podcasts at the time. Yeah, that was in 2021.
What was your favorite gaming podcast at the time?
The two that primarily inspired my show are Watch Out for Fireballs and Kane and Rinse. Those are the two. And they both do very similar to my show, like one game per episode, critique analysis of the games. Watch Out for Fireballs does a plot by like a beat by beat plot walkthrough where they go through the game like in chronological order, which I don't do. I kind of like mishmash those two shows together. Watch Out for Fireballs and Kane and Rinse. Those were the two that I wanted to model what I was doing after.
Are they both still active, creating content?
Yeah.
Sweet.
I think both over 10 years running podcasts. So yeah, they're kind of both OGs in a way. Podcasting is still relatively new, especially for gaming, like this type of show. But they're still going strong as far as I know.
Never heard of either. There's so many podcasts out there, and I'm becoming a little bit of a podcast slut. I need variety. And I have, I'll have a handful that I'm listening to regularly, but sometimes I'm like, I just want something new.
It's one of the things, right? Like for you and I, when we do these things, we meet lots of people, working on the King of Games with Retro Hangover together, and we meet all the people involved in that. And we build up this network of people who are all doing really great stuff. I don't really have time to listen to most of the big shows anymore because I want to listen to what my friends are doing. And then I still listen to Kane and Rinse and Watch Out for Fireballs because they're very good at what they do. No shade, but I don't listen to Retronauts anymore because I have my friends' podcasts. I would rather listen to them.
I also started with Retronauts like a long time ago. I think it was one of the first gaming podcasts I ran across. And like props to them for being the first gaming podcast for many people. Like they'll always have that. Every once in a while I'll go back and just listen to one like for old time's sake, right? I used to listen to this all the time. Just there's so much content and so much good content that, it's very hard to keep up on all of it. But I think it's a good problem. That's what we want.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of good work that people are doing out there, even within our community of podcasters.
Now, back to, so you went from Game Boy Light to Game Boy Color and then Game Boy Advanced, but you had the N64. You did bring up Ocarina of Time. But were there any other 64 games that really impacted you?
Yeah. So I thought a little bit more as you were talking about, like, when you were thinking about like your perception of, yourself as maybe a gamer or someone who loves video games first and foremost out of all possible hobbies. And I think like Pokemon was an obsession and I loved those games, but Ocarina of Time was probably the first game I played that made me like excited about this is what video games can be. And I love what this is. And I love like, if this is what video games are going to be like in the future, then I'm just going to love video games for the rest of my life. Ocarina of Time, I think, was that game. In a way, that is probably one of the games that inspired that kind of thought about like, this is the thing that I love. I love this more than movies. I love this more than watching, TV shows after school. This is my favorite thing that I can do in the house, stuff like that.
I'm glad you brought that up because Ocarina of Time obviously gets a lot of love online, a lot of YouTube videos that talk about all the aspects of it. But I think one of the things that is talked about less is exactly what you just brought up, is the impact at the time when it came out. It was a leap that we don't really get anymore. Games don't seem to have as big of a leap between generations and IPs and sequels. Ocarina of Time was, well, we had Link to the Past, and then you had some handheld entries in between. But the next mainline Zelda, the jump from Link to the Past to Ocarina of the Time, the same thing. You mentioned that that's when you started feeling, hey, if I'm going to be at home and have a choice between a movie or a TV show, I'm going to choose the video game because this is cooler than TV shows. This is cooler than movies.
Yep.
It was around the same time for me. I was playing a lot of video games, but Ocarina of Time, excuse me, was the first time I remember, besides Dragon Ball Z, waking up at 4:35 in the morning to try to get time on the screen before school because I was so obsessed. And the only other time I did that is, at least when I was coming up in my neighborhood, we had regular public TV. And on channel 13 at 4:30 in the morning on Sundays, they would air Dragon Ball Z.
Ooh, yeah.
So I would wake up, watch an episode, and fall back asleep. But I specifically remember waking up and playing Ocarina of Time and like looking at the clock and getting stressed. Oh shit, school's almost here. School, and all I want to do is play this game. Then I go to school, run home, and the moment I was done with whatever I had to do, chores and homework, I was back on that game. And I think similarly, that's my first memory of becoming completely obsessed. I could not think about anything else. And I didn't think about it until you brought it up, but I was the same way. I wouldn't like cartoons, lame, movies, lame. It's video games. Because this experience of playing Zelda on the 64 is, I can't even believe it's real. It was so engrossing. Now, in hindsight, if you go back and play it, it's cool and it's retro, but it's really hard to convey what it was like to play that game at the time it came out.
Yeah. Part of it is the age too, and the newness of like what was possible. Because I didn't have a Super Nintendo. I had played Link's Awakening before that, but I'm not even sure that I connected like that this is the Legend of Zelda that I had on the Game Boy a couple years earlier, that this is like, it's going to be 3D, and I didn't have like some perception of like what that was going to be like. We turned it on, or like maybe I played it first at a friend's house or something, and I was like, just, playing the game separated from the Legend of Zelda series. Just what that game was magic at the time that I first played it. I think part of it too is like when we're older now and we play so many games and we have so much experience with it. And like you said, the difference between PS4 and PS5 and then PS5 and PS6 in the future and stuff, it's not the same. It will never be the same unless like VR takes off or something like that. But we just don't have the space for new magical things like that quite as often. The biggest thing would be like the first time I played Dark Souls. It was so different from everything else that I was playing at the time that it was sort of like that same type of thing. But it's even like that, it doesn't really touch what it was like to play Ocarina for the first time. Not even close. Not even close.
But I'm glad you brought that up. As you said it, I thought, my first experience with Dark Souls was similar. I played Demon Souls. I bought it, not knowing anything. Just, it's an RPG, fantasy looking game. I'm into this stuff. Bought it for the PS3. Played it for an hour and was like, this is fucking, I don't know what's happening. Never mind. I think I just took it back, sold it, lost 60% of my money and bought something else. I don't remember exactly. But then my brother kept telling me, you got to play this game, Dark Souls. You got to play this game, Dark Souls. And it's the sequel to this game, Demon Souls. Oh, no, hell no. That game sucks. What are you talking about? I promise you, I'm not going to tell you anything. It's hard. Just figure it out. Get through the learning curve. And I remember, the opening Firelink Shrine, you're supposed to go up the stairs into the first area, the Undead Burg. But I ended up going left on the elevator and going to the graveyard, to the skeletons over and over and over and over again. And I was told, this game's really hard. You just got to get good. And I remember just going in there over and over. Damn, when they said this is hard, this is no joke. Like every single one of these enemies just one-shots me. And every single enemy is essentially a boss. And I finally called him. Dude, I think I have 5 or 6 hours in of just dying in the graveyard. Like, man, I really tried. I gave it my best shot, dude. This game is not for me. I've been stuck in this. I can't even get past the first area. And he's like, what area? I'm like, the graveyard. He just starts dying laughing.
Yeah.
And anyway, he's told me where to go. And then I started picking it up. And this is a long way of getting around to, it was magical, similar to Ocarina of Time, not because of the jump to 3D and the graphics, but because of the way the game was structured and was
Yeah.
played. And it was like a fresh, new, magical experience. What Ocarina did was that same thing, plus the jump to 3D, plus the visuals. So it was a tier above. But I think bringing up Dark Souls, if anyone had a similar experience, but you didn't play Ocarina at the time of its release, that Dark Souls feeling is probably the closest thing that I can think of that's semi-modern. I mean, there was other games, PS1, 64, and even some PS2. You had these jumps that were mind-blowing. But for me, that magic and those jumps started condensing into smaller leaps, pretty much like PS3 and on.
Yeah. And like, that's not to say that, I haven't had 15 magical experiences playing video games just this year, but those games that change the way you think about the medium and the art, those don't happen very often.
No.
And that's, Ocarina of Time was the first one because I'd come from handheld and again, mostly playing Pokemon to now an adventure in 3D that played really well and, had the puzzles and the boss fights and all like the feeling of going on the adventure and stuff like that. That was the first.
Now, anything else on 64 that was super impactful?
Super impactful, I'm not sure of. Like, we had a ton of fun playing GoldenEye with our friends. And like, when I go over to my cousin's house, we play GoldenEye. GoldenEye gets a lot of shit these days, which is fair. I don't personally think it's that good, but we had a great time playing it back then. That was probably impactful because I did play multiplayer games for quite a long time, all the way through like Halos and, Call of Duty on the Xbox 360 and stuff like that. So that started with GoldenEye for sure. I guess probably like other impactful stuff would be stuff I played with friends like Mario Kart and Smash Brothers and Bomberman 64 multiplayer and stuff like that. And Majora's Mask and Super Mario 64, of course, like the hits for the N64. We played them all.
You are, I believe, the only person who's brought up Bomberman 64, which I love.
Because that multiplayer is fucking great and someone has to bring it up.
Yeah. Yeah. So everything else is, 64's library was obviously smaller than the PS1 and some of the other contemporary libraries. So a lot of the similar games get brought up. And one that I enjoyed that no one's brought up before is Bomberman 64. I rented it at on like a vacation where I brought my 64 and there was other friends and family, multiple families, and we just played the multiplayer for a weekend straight, and it was awesome. So much I bought the game because of that experience. Yeah. But if you don't have a bunch of people to play with, it's not quite as fun, but the multiplayer is just phenomenal.
Yeah, the single player is not good, but the multiplayer is very fun.
Very, very good. Did you ever play Shadows of the Empire, the Star Wars?
I did. Yeah, couldn't beat the train level. That's like level 2 or something like that. I played it a lot, couldn't beat it though.
That's probably the only other ones on 64 that were big for me that are not as well known. I loved Star Fox 64. It's actually my favorite.
Oh yeah, of
Star
course.
Fox.
Yeah. How could I forget Star Fox?
The tank was just, loved the tank. Jet Force Gemini is another one that doesn't come up a ton. I played that. And probably the rarest one that you maybe heard of is it's called Blast Corps.
I've heard the name. Like you said, like there's not that many N64 games, so I've heard of most of them, but that's one that I didn't have. I did play Jet Force Gemini, Donkey Kong 64, all that stuff.
I didn't play DK64. It just didn't. I loved the SNES games, all three of them. It just didn't. That and Banjo-Kazooie both get a lot of love. Well, Banjo gets more. DK is sort of like split. People love it, but admit that it's bad, but still love it. I think it was Josh from Still Loading.
Josh is fighting the good fight for
shilling Donkey Kong 64 for ages. Another one on King of Games, if everyone listens to that, Wave Race 64, I think is probably my favorite 64 game. And I already spent hours gushing about that game, so I won't do it here. But you said you had a PS1 for a short period of time.
Yeah.
Did anything stick out during that time?
Only Spyro the Dragon. We played a lot of Spyro, and I remember we had what was probably Gran Turismo, but it was a racing game, and we had a wheel and everything, but we didn't play it a lot. It was probably too hard for us at, age 9 or whatever we had this thing. So it was just Spyro. And then we probably just played our Nintendo stuff so much after, getting what we wanted out of Spyro that my parents were like, hey, they haven't touched that thing in like 5 months and they're asking for this new thing. We're selling this.
But they went all out and got a wheel, I guess.
Yeah. And like, I feel bad because I remember using that wheel a couple of times, but that's it. Like I said, I think that game was too hard. It might have been Gran Turismo if it was too hard for us because we had racing games to me at the time was like Cruising USA and stuff, and it's very different.
Yeah, there's Cruising was on 64 and Rush. Did you ever play Rush?
Didn't play Rush, no.
But it's also just very arcadey. No,
Yeah,
the complete opposite of a simulation.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, simulation is too much for someone young and had. I could see that same thing. This game's hard and it's boring, and I don't even like. You had to get the licenses. Imagine being a kid. I can't even race because I have to get this stupid license.
Yeah.
And no, I'm just gonna go play Cruising USA.
Just go play Spyro. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's unfortunate because the PS1 is just my favorite console of all time.
Yeah, but the good part is now that emulation is so easy, I've had a great time over the last like 5 years or so, really just working through those PlayStation 1 games that I missed because I didn't own a PlayStation until the PS4, so I didn't play any of the PS1 classics. I played Final Fantasy VII for the first time in like 2014 or something.
Wow.
So I didn't play any of those classics but for most of them until like the last 5 years. So I have had fun going back and, revisiting those. But
In going back and visiting them as someone who's playing them in the modern era, which PS1 game do you think has held up the best?
I laughed because the first game that came to my head was Xenogears. It's probably my favorite PlayStation 1 RPG, but like Final Fantasy Tactics, I think is still pretty damn good. I never beat that game, but I think it's really good. I thought the original Tomb Raider was pretty good, like way better than I thought it would be. As we're talking today with the King of Games episode that I think the both of us did, Tomb Raider versus Resident Evil, just came out. And I'm remembering playing both of those for the first time. The original Silent Hill, I just played that for the first time. I think that's pretty good still. So there's a lot of stuff that I'm coming to find it's not necessarily that they've held up because if you think about Silent Hill, for example, a lot of the stuff about Silent Hill, the way it looks, the way it feels to control, I wouldn't say they've held up. They're just old and they're okay. But the things that Silent Hill does really well are still very good. They've always been very good. There's a lot of really good stuff I've found.
I'm glad you brought up Xenogears. It's not my favorite PS1 JRPG, but I'm working on a new podcast that's inspired by a podcast called Retrograde Amnesia. And the first game they covered is Xenogears. And they did like 80, 60, 80 something episodes on Xenogears. And I loved it. I listened to the whole thing. That game, as flawed as it may be, because it is very flawed.
Yeah.
I don't know. That it scratches an itch that none of the other Xeno games have managed to scratch for me. And to me, it really feels like a special, partially handicapped unicorn. Like it's amazing. It's got some serious problems. Specifically, the most famous issue is the last disc is just not finished. And the game takes this super hard turn. For those who may not be aware, the game just turns into a series of cutscenes in hallways out of nowhere and then ends. And it feels very awkward.
Maybe a hot take here. I liked disc 2 a lot because I don't think the gameplay in Xenogears is very good. So less dungeons, less repetitive combat, less pushing in those death blow combos and more story. I was in on disc 2.
That's a good point. It is more streamlined, and the story,
for sure.
The story and the lore is, it is the best part for me. And I would say the art direction and the sprites and the battle system are number 2.
In the music, yeah,
that's true. I kind of not giving music its fair due. The death blows in the battle system does get old by the end of the game. but I love it. I don't love the environments, like the 3D environments and the textures. I think other games that did the hybrid 2D 3D way better would be Breath of Fire 3 and 4.
Hmm.
They just did that better as far as the aesthetics go. But I loved the sprite animation in the battle system. But you're right. By the end of the game, you've done every death blow so many times, and you just, oh
Yeah.
my God. Disc 2, I can see that. It is more streamlined. Like I recently replayed it, and by recently I mean probably like 3, 4 years ago. And what stood out to me is that it's just jarring. Like the game just kind of changes how it works.
Yeah.
You're
If you
used to
weren't
one
prepared
thing and
for
then
it.
it switches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew it was coming, so I was mentally prepared for it. So it was fine. And again, like my favorite things about the game were the story and the music, and disc two is all story and music. So I was on board.
It's true.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on Saitan Uzuki? Is he a good guy or a bad guy?
Ultimately a good guy.
Really?
Yeah. You know, he's that classic character who is playing both sides, but ultimately for the greater good.
Okay. Okay. I can see that. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I don't want to talk about Xenogears forever. I think he's a little bit of an asshole. Well, maybe a lot of bit of an asshole, but he was doing what he felt was the ultimate good at the very
Yeah.
least.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you know, I did a you said retrograde amnesia did like 60 episodes. I know Resonant Arc did like 25 episodes about Xenogears. I just did one like 3 hour and 45 minute recording about Xenogears. So there's a lot to talk about. And
Yeah.
I know that both of us could go down this rabbit hole if we wanted to.
Yeah. Anything else on PS1 playing retroactively that you want to cover?
Honestly, like, I don't know. Like, I don't. Well, Final Fantasy 9. I like Final Fantasy 9 a lot. That's my favorite Final Fantasy on the PlayStation 1 by a pretty wide margin. Yeah, really good. I played that for the first time in like 2020 or so and didn't like it. And then I replayed it a couple years ago for a podcast episode and I liked it a lot more. So, you know,
When
if we're
you
going to talk
played it
RPGs,
recently, was it the PC version or emulation?
it was the Switch version
Oh,
I
okay.
played. Yeah.
That's basically the re-release. You had the boost, the
Yep.
2x time, and all
Mhm.
that stuff. Okay.
Yep.
Have you seen the recent Moguri Mod 9 news?
I did. Yeah, I see screenshots of that. Rick from Pixel Project Radio shares that whenever there's an update because he's a huge FF9 fan. So I have seen that. It looks nice. I'm not sure that I want to replay that game. I just have too many games to play, too many new games to play. But it does look really nice.
I was frustrated because I replayed 7, 8, and 9 2 years ago.
Hmm.
Actually 7, 8, 9, 11, and 12, and did with all my best settings visually that I could get at the time, and then put YouTube videos of every boss with my settings. It was
Yeah,
massive
yeah,
undertaking.
yeah.
And now 9 has come out, and there was no native 60 FPS option at the time, and I had to do like a bunch of like really annoying workarounds to get 60 FPS to work, and then I
Hmm.
had to do some interpolation, and I eventually got the footage looking the way I wanted. And then now it's like I need to replay the whole thing and redo the video because it's so much better now. The textures are better. You can go all the way up to 120 FPS. They have the realistic shaders and the toon shaders now. The backgrounds have all been completely redone with the new A upscaling model and manually
Hmm.
retouched. It now supports ultra widescreen. But I feel the same way. Like I don't have the time to do this again, but my OCD also pisses me off. But it looks so much better, and I
It
can
does
make
look really nice.
much better video.
It looks nice, yeah. And it's like there's all those rumors about a remake of FF9 coming out, and then you see the new Moguri mod stuff, and it's like I kind of wish whatever remake is coming, like this is kind of what I wish it would look like, you know? So
The rumors, I haven't kept up with it recently, but the rumors last year were that they were not doing a Final Fantasy VII type remake, but more of a classic remaster with, I guess bells and whistles and visual tweaks added to it. So I do think that is the direction they're heading.
that's
But
good.
those rumors, you never know, right? Like they're just rumors. So that could not be accurate for all I
Mhm.
know. But I've seen that rumor come up a bunch that there was another game Square did. I think they mentioned Star Ocean Second Story R as an idea of the scope of the remake. And that's one of my favorite remakes ever because it's a remake under the hood and all things said and done, but it looks more like a remaster, but it really is a remake. They rebuilt that game from the ground up. All the sprites were redone with extra animations. Like, for example, Star Ocean Second, this is super nerdy, but Star Ocean Second Story R, the 2D sprites, they don't just have an up, left, right, down animation. Newer games will also have that diagonal animation, so the one axis in between. So when you run diagonal, you actually have a diagonal animation as opposed to an up animation that's moving diagonal. But Star Ocean Second Story R has 2 degrees of animation in between up, down, left, and right.
Okay.
Which is just batshit crazy to me because that 4X is all the assets that they need to create. And then they do that for every single character.
Right.
So if they go that deep on Final Fantasy IX and do that high quality of a remake, I think that would absolutely crush. But we'll see.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
After the PlayStation, let's go back. You didn't do PS2, you went to GameCube?
Yep.
What sticks out on the GameCube?
On the GameCube, Smash Melee, probably the first one that sticks out. My brother and I just played a lot of that together. Probably my biggest single memory on the GameCube in general. We would play Smash Melee like on a weekend, day when we didn't have anything to do. We'd do a team battle against 2 CPUs and we'd set them all at 99 stock and we would just play that fight. And it would take like 3 hours. It was just the kind of shit you can only do when you're kids and you have nothing you need to do. But we would do that and it was so much fun. Like I played a lot of stuff on the GameCube, but that's probably my single like biggest memory of that console.
Do you think that Melee is still the best Smash Brothers game?
No, actually, my controversial take is that every new Smash Brothers game is the best Smash Brothers game. Because
I think I'm in agreement with you.
Thank you. I don't take it seriously. Like I don't people got mad at Brawl because your character can trip and fall, but like I'm playing Smash Brothers with my friends when we're drunk. Like I don't care if my character trips and falls. Like I'm not losing money over this or something. So I liked Brawl because it had more characters than Melee. And then I liked the one on Wii U because it had more characters than Brawl and so on and so forth. And more stages and more crazy items and stuff like that. Like the fun multiplayer like party aspect of Smash is what I like the most. I don't care about like 1v1 Final Destination Smash Brothers at all. To me, give me more characters. Give me characters from all these games. Like give me Shulk and Joker and all these characters from these games I played. And that's what I like about Smash is that like I've been playing Smash for so long. I have the muscle memory. I can pick up a character I've never ever played as and I can hang because I know how to play Smash Brothers. So like it supports that, like that baseline level of skill. If you know how to play Smash Brothers, you can pick up any character and you can have fun with it. And then if you want to like practice and like actually get good with that character, you can do that too. And it's a deep fighting game with, advanced like techniques that people pull off in competitive play and stuff. But for me, I just like playing as different. I play with random when I play Smash Brothers. I don't really have a main. A couple years ago, we did a tournament between podcasters on Ultimate, and I just played random in the tournament, and I lost fairly early on. Number one, because I played Rick, and Rick's better than me. But the other part was like I got a couple draws where I was like, oh, I'm not good at all with this character, so I just lost. But it was fine. I don't care.
I'm in the middle. I do enjoy Final Destination 1v1, no items, because most of the Smash I played was when I was single, knocking doors, trying to hustle some money, and I had roommates, and we would go knock doors and hate our life, and then come home and drink and play Smash and just fight each other. And it became, between the few of us, it was just like 1v1, winner stays on, loser loses the controller.
Yeah.
So I do enjoy that aspect. And the reason I asked is a lot of those kids that I still play with, are not kids, adults now, they are very adamant that GameCube Smash is the best for competitive play. And obviously there's a lot of pros that think that. It's probably true if that's what you're into. But I agree, there's more characters. Like the newest one, it has Sephiroth. Like, what are you gonna,
so many. Yeah.
What are you going to do? I get to play as Sephiroth. Like, no.
People people get to play as Sora. If you're a Kingdom Hearts fan, like you get to play as Sora, and
Yeah.
what more can you ask for? Like like Smash Brothers is literally bringing all these, favorite games into one place. You can play as all these characters. And like, you're right. Like if you listen to a competitive Smash Brothers player talk about why Melee is the best, I don't think that they're wrong about that, but they want different things from Smash than I want. So,
Is there anything on GameCube that's maybe a deep cut that you really like that you'd recommend?
I don't know about deep cuts, but 007 Nightfire was, I thought, like a much better game than GoldenEye, and we played that a lot. That was our, like, probably other than Smash, my favorite multiplayer game on the GameCube was 007 Nightfire. Yeah, deep cuts, I don't really have a whole lot. I probably played the hits for the most part.
And then after GameCube was OG Xbox?
Yeah, OG
Well,
Xbox.
they did overlap a little bit. Did you have both at the same time?
Yeah, I think so, because then I didn't get a Wii after that. So it was OG Xbox and then Xbox 360. Yeah.
And on those, so let's just lump those two together, OG Xbox. The 360 was massive as far as terms of titles on that
Yeah.
generation. The OG had a little bit less, but let's just lump those two together. What stands out to you?
I'll stick with the OG at the beginning because if Ocarina of Time was the moment when I realized that video games as, an art form, I wasn't thinking about it as an art form when I was 11, but you know what I mean. If that was when I first started thinking about video games differently, the 360 is when it like just exploded because when I think that was around the time I was in college. I spent too much of my student loan money on new games. Like I had more money than I could responsibly handle, in my checking account at the beginning of the semester. That was when that exploded. But on the OG Xbox, Halo, for sure. We played a lot of Halo. I'm a pretty big Halo naysayer now, but back then, there was nothing like Halo. Fable was another one we played a lot of. And then Morrowind was probably the game I played the most and my favorite game on the Xbox because I wasn't playing on PC. I was playing on the Xbox.
Morrowind, those games, I didn't play any of them until Morrowind, but what Morrowind stood out to me was I had played Grand Theft Auto 3 on the PlayStation 2 and Vice City, and probably San Andreas was after Morrowind. I can't remember exactly. Those games were open world games, but Morrowind felt way more open.
Oh, yeah.
Way bigger. So I just remember
Yeah.
thinking like, oh, I didn't know games could be this open.
Yeah. I had Vice City also. I think that was on the original Xbox. I probably played those around a similar time. And Morrowind is way different. Like Vice City's a city. Like your
Yeah.
Grand Theft Auto, you're driving around cities. I know what cities are. Morrowind is this alien, weird open world. Like you have no idea what's out there. And I'm pretty down on Bethesda's like open world game design now because they haven't really changed it a whole lot since Morrowind. But when Morrowind was there and then Oblivion was the reason I bought a 360 was so I could play Oblivion. Those were my introduction to open worlds. And I think Morrowind is like a crazy one to introduce you to the concept of an open world that you can go anywhere and, you find a cave and you go down in the cave and anything could be in there. In reality, anything could not be down there. It's just probably some guys that are going to attack you. But like at the time, anything, it was endless possibility in that game.
And we didn't understand the open world formula like we do now.
Yeah.
Now it's harder to feel that feeling of anything could happen because you've seen most of the tricks and you can usually guess. Like I think down here is going to be like I'll probably be rewarded with a accessory or something because this is not a main dungeon. This is a side dungeon, so I'm going to get side dungeon type content, side dungeon type bosses,
and you can,
etc.
Yeah, and you can load up like a new open world game, and if you've played a lot of them, or if you've just, like the two of us, if you've been around the entire time that open world games have been a thing, you can load one up and be like, oh, this is like the Ubisoft model open world. I know exactly what this entire thing is going to be like now. It doesn't mean I'm not going to have fun, but I'm not going to be surprised by what happens in Ghost of Tsushima, the new Star Wars game or something like that. But like Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild, those are the two recent ones that like surprised people, and that I think that's why so many people like loved those worlds, is because you couldn't predict them again. It was like playing Morrowind again for the first time.
Precisely. I just played the DLC for Elden Ring and I'm not quite done. But what I
Okay.
noticed is you brought up that Bethesda hasn't changed their formula in so long. Ubisoft hasn't really changed their formula. And those are the two main formulas that everybody's referencing. I had agree. I love Ghost of Tsushima. The PC version is you should play it if you have the extra cash. That 3080 Ti will that game is so goddamn beautiful.
Yeah, dude, that game was incredible looking on the PS4,
Yeah.
you know? So,
Seeing it on PC at 60 frames a second and 4K and playing with camera hacks, I just can't believe that game is real. But you're right. It is like, oh, I'm really familiar with this formula. I know exactly. I don't know what's going to happen in the story, but I know how the game's going to unfold. And the game,
yeah.
yeah. Whereas Elden Ring, specifically the new DLC, the way the map is laid out and the verticality and how things connect, things do not. It's the first time I've legitimately, I have a map in the game, but I'm lost and I cannot get to the marker I want to get to because the map doesn't work like regular open. Most open world maps are just sort of varying degrees of verticality, but it's just sort of a flat map. Where Elden Ring, everything weaves in itself, and things go in ways you don't expect, and certain things are blocked off, and the access to this area is not. It's on the other side of the map, and you've got to go through a tunnel, and you could say it's quote bad game design. I had a lot of time being frustrated not being able to get to the map marker that I want to get to. But that's also what made it feel fresh and rewarding because I didn't know what was going to happen. I was surprised.
It makes those discoveries fulfilling and rewarding when you find them because like the game didn't just serve it up to you. You had to figure out how to get there. I'm glad this is an entire topic that we could go down this rabbit hole, but this is the second From Software game that we brought up as bringing some kind of magic to your experience or some novelty to your experience, surprising you, subverting your expectations for what the game is going to be, and not really talking about difficulty, which is, something I try to, whenever From Software comes up, I try to bring up that they're most famous for making difficult games, but the people who love their games, I think a lot of them love them for different reasons than just like a challenge to be overcome, because you can get a challenge anywhere in video games.
And you can make cheap difficulty that's not.
Yeah.
Difficulty in and of itself doesn't mean it's rewarding. There's an art to difficulty.
And I don't think that From Software is perfect as far as difficulty goes. I think especially in the Dark Souls 3 DLC and the Elden Ring DLC in some cases, I think it's too hard. The bosses are too aggressive. They have too much health. I don't particularly think that that's interesting. But what is interesting is like basically everything else about it. It's something that they don't get enough credit for because people are so stuck on talking about challenge and difficulty, and like the most popular Souls streamers are the challenge runners and stuff like that. And no one talks about their level design, which is like the best in the business. So like, I don't want to take this down an entire tangent, but just want to bring this up for people watching or listening. Second From Software game we brought up, not because of like overcoming the challenge, because of like the other magic of their game design.
Yeah, it's Dark Souls 1 is my favorite level design and map ever created.
It's wild.
It is, and everything makes sense and interconnects in a way that makes sense, even though it's not an open world. It's pieced together. But I saw someone like take every map because the game, the PS3 and the 360 were not powerful enough to have like one giant map, right? So it's going to load that they hide the loading times in elevators and doors, and it loads different levels. Someone I saw on Twitter, maybe YouTube, pulled each map and put it into Blender or some other 3D software and put it all together, and the entire map cohesively fits together in 3D space. And it just and they did that again with Elden Ring at a different level. And I think not only is the level design, but the way, well, I should pull back. I think Breath of the Wild really, I don't love that game, but I have to give it credit that they know how to build a horizon and give you enough things that are interesting but not overwhelm you. But there's always something in the horizon that you can see that you can actually go to
Yeah.
that sparks your interest.
It's like they said that back when I don't remember if it was Skyrim the first time people started talking about, you can see that mountain, you can go to that mountain. But the thing that people found out is like, yeah, I can go to that mountain, but why? Why would I go there?
Yes.
Am I going to be rewarded for taking the time to go and climb that mountain? I think Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild are two games that do reward you in very different ways, pursuing those curious thoughts that you have while playing. And like the world design of Dark Souls 1 that you mentioned is so like incredible, and they really never did it again until the Elden Ring DLC, because it was probably so difficult to put together that they were just like, you know what? Like, we did it. Let's not do that again until the Elden Ring DLC.
I like Dark Souls 2. I think it gets a lot of bad rap. Gameplay is fun, but I remember being so let down because the thing I was most excited about Dark Souls is the map, that sense of discovery. And there's a part in Dark Souls where you go up into, I forget the area, you go up into like a castle and you go higher and higher and higher and you go through a doorway and it's like a lava mountain, and that just makes no logical sense. Like, how could there be lava up here? Like I'm in a tower in the sky, and that just really, it's not that big of a deal, but it really took me out of the experience because I was wanting another Dark Souls 1 cohesive map. And you're right. Elden Ring base game was more open world and it had a little bit of that in pockets.
Yeah.
But the DLC did feel, oh, this is a Dark Souls 1 area. It's just way bigger and times 10. It's on steroids.
Yeah, it's a marvel.
It is a marvel. I haven't beaten it yet, so I don't want to talk. I could talk about Elden Ring and Dark Souls forever. So
me too.
Anything else on 360 before some rapid fire questions that I always do towards the end?
So like I said, 360 was when stuff like really exploded, playing more stuff than I ever played before. I talk a little bit of shit about Bethesda, but this was the Bethesda era for me. I played Oblivion, I played the Fallout games, I played Skyrim, all on the 360. Lost Odyssey was one that I loved on the 360 back then.
I want to play it so bad. Everyone says such good things about that game.
I just I got a podcast coming out in 3 weeks about that. Yeah, I went and bought a 360 again just so I could play that because, Mistwalker's not interested in putting it on anything other than Xbox backwards compatibility. But I did play that and I loved it. I played a lot of sports games back then. So like 2K was probably my favorite one on the 360. Guitar Hero and Rock Band. Can't talk about the 360 without talking about those, because the 360 came out my freshman year of college, and nothing brought people in the dorm together like, you walk by a room and someone's playing Guitar Hero in there. And then suddenly there's 3 people playing Guitar Hero. And then suddenly there's 9 people waiting for their turn to play Guitar Hero. It's like, a lot of my good friends to this day are people from my dorm freshman year in college. And we were brought together during those first couple weeks because my room had a guy with a PS2 with Guitar Hero. And then there was another one down the hall with a 360 with Guitar Hero 2. And that brought us all together.
I think one of the magic parts about Guitar Hero in that age frame, girls would play Guitar Hero with you.
Everyone. Yeah.
Everyone. You could like hang out with a girl. You could attract a female with the video game that you legitimately enjoyed, and she would have a good time.
Yeah.
And I played a ton of Guitar Hero in lots of different social circles because you're right. It brought everyone together.
Mm-hmm. One of the barriers to having people around and like passing a controller around and playing is you have to know how to use a 2 analog stick controller to play. Yeah. The other thing was the Wii, that like anyone could play Wii bowling. And same thing, freshman year in college, like I didn't have a Wii, but 3 people on my floor had Wiis, and we would play Wii bowling and Wii tennis and stuff like that. But yeah, you didn't need to know how to use a controller to play Guitar Hero. It's a brand new controller and it's kind of like a guitar. And even easier with Rock Band because you could play the drums or you could just sing and everyone would have a great time playing Rock Band. So that was like, in college, the games we played together were mostly Guitar Hero, Rock Band, and Smash Brothers Brawl. But when we had a big group of people and it wasn't like, everybody here knows how to play Smash Brothers, then like just fucking throw on Rock Band. Everyone can have a good time with Rock Band.
Yeah. That was a very hot trend that rose and fell, I guess you could say, pretty fast. But I don't think that takes away from the impact that that entire sort of,
No.
I don't know what we would call it, genre or subgenre or period in gaming, where these
Mhm.
music games, because you did have the Guitar Heroes, you had the singing games, you had the dance games like Revolution, and then you had Rock Band, and then it sort of fizzled out and it became more of a niche thing again. But for a time, it was as mainstream gets.
Yeah. You definitely, like, for people who weren't there, you did have to be there to understand like how popular they were. But it was like when I say that everyone would jump on and play Rock Band, I mean everyone would take a turn. If you didn't like playing the guitar, you played the drums or you sang. Everyone could play and everyone had a good time. And like again, kind of like when I said Pokemon hit at the right time, Guitar Hero and Rock Band hit at the right time. Freshman year in college, I'm trying to make friends. I don't know anybody who lives in this building with me, but everyone likes playing Guitar Hero and Rock Band together. So like that's easy money.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a cultural phenomena for sure.
Yeah.
And I would argue in some ways it's more mainstream and bigger, even though it was short-lived, than some of the other titles we mentioned, like Pokemon, because you had people who didn't play games before
Hmm.
and didn't play games after, but during
Yeah.
that time we're playing a lot of Guitar Hero and Rock Band.
Yeah. Same with Wii Sports. That was probably the other one where like
Yes.
everyone can strap on the Wii remote and play Wii bowling.
The tennis, I played a lot of tennis with friends as well.
Hmm.
So we're kind of getting to more modern. I wanted to run some questions. Well, I guess you didn't do any PS2 retroactively? Have you played any PS2 games?
Oh, tons. Yeah, tons.
Anything what are your top picks for PS2 actively, excuse me.
Final Fantasy X is my favorite PS2 game, but it's also one of my like 10 favorite games ever. So
Is it your favorite Final Fantasy?
it's a, if you ask me, so we're talking about 10 right now, I might say it's my favorite. If the conversation was centered around Final Fantasy VI, I might say that was my favorite. But
Okay.
those are the two. So that's my favorite PS2 game probably, but I played that back in college because my roommates always had PS2s. So I played that for the first time then. Part of the cool thing about From Software is they're not new. Being a big fan of their newer titles and emulation being so easy, once again, I can go back and play Kingsfield and Shadow Tower and stuff like that. And I've really enjoyed playing, especially Kingsfield 4 on the PS2 and Shadow Tower Abyss also on the PS2. And those are really cool, number one, because they're good games. But number two, they are really fun to go back and see DNA that persisted into Demon's Souls and then into the rest of the series. It was back there even before Miyazaki worked at From Software. They're still doing some of that stuff back then. And I'm sure if you go back to Kingsfield 1 and 2, you'll see a lot of that stuff too. But those have been fun from the PS2, especially like going back and discovering those.
Yeah. I've thought about doing a video on YouTube. It would be a massive undertaking, but FromSoft before Dark Souls or before Demon Souls, there's so many games.
Yeah,
put
they're
out so many
prolific.
games.
Yeah, and they were doing Armored Core alongside the fantasy
Yes.
games, and they were like a developer for hire for a lot of people. So like if you look at the list of games they made, they were making like 6 or 7 games a year back then, which is crazy.
Yeah. And that kind of Kingsfield first person dungeon crawler, PS2, there's the ones you mentioned, but I remember going down this rabbit hole semi recently and looking at some other YouTube videos, and there was way more PS2 FromSoft titles than I realized. There's a lot.
There's a lot. Yeah.
Anything modern lately that's been like a big impact to you?
Yeah. Since this is the Gaming Memories podcast, I got to share a story. All right. So 2015, I moved to South Korea and I took my Xbox 360 and my Wii U with me. That was like the entirety of like, I am moving across the world in only things I can carry in my luggage. I didn't send anything overseas. And my entire carry-on bag was those two consoles because you can't check consoles. So that was important to me. But when I got to Korea, I didn't really play anything for about 3 years. I might have turned on Dark Souls 2 a couple of times, but that's it. I barely touched my stuff. When Breath of the Wild came out, because I had a Wii U, I thought to myself, like, I'm not really playing games. It might be done. It might be time to just sell this stuff, make a few $100 and like, use it on a plane ticket or something like that. So I was like, I loved Zelda. It was my favorite series back then. So I'm going to get this new Zelda game. It'll be the last thing. And I'll play this and then I'll sell all of this. Cause like, other than that, I wasn't interested in anything else. And we're here talking about, video games right now. So obviously that was not the last one. I loved Breath of the Wild so much that it like completely reinvigorated my love of video games. I didn't care that they got rid of the way Zelda games used to work because I played Skyward Sword and I hated it. I borrowed a friend's Wii to play Skyward Sword in like 2013 and I hated it. So I was like, they're shaking this up. This is great. Like this is, the open world is so much fun to explore. I probably put, 200-300 hours into Breath of the Wild on the Wii U. I'm one of like the 10 people that played that game on the Wii U because the Switch was out, but I didn't buy it because I thought I didn't want it. And so then I played all through Breath of the Wild. Then I bought Xenoblade Chronicles because I heard the soundtrack and the soundtrack brought me in. And I played Xenoblade Chronicles. And then I got the Twilight Princess remaster on the Wii U. And then I got a Switch. And then it just like, I started Googling top 10 Switch games and like downloading all this stuff. And here we are. I think, honestly, the reason that we're here having this conversation is because I decided to play Breath of the Wild after not gaming for several years, not paying attention to anything happening in gaming 2015, 2016, 2017 until Breath of the Wild came out.
So Breath of the Wild saved your gaming life.
Yeah, 100%. Like I was not that I didn't like playing it, but I was just so busy, not busy, but like I was doing other stuff. I was traveling a lot. I was watching a lot of TV shows and movies, spending a lot of time studying language over there. Just wasn't playing games at all. And then it was like, hey, new Zelda game, last hurrah. But that's not how it worked out.
Famous last words. This is the last one.
Yeah.
What were you doing in Korea? What were you doing for work?
Teaching English.
Okay. I have a couple of friends that went there. And you were there for 3 years? 4 years?
7.
7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And what brought
just
you
moved back a few years ago.
What brought you back to the good old USA?
We thought like it would be a good career move for both of like me and my wife who I met over there. And I was getting tired of teaching full time. And it's a tough place to get a job if you're not teaching because, I can speak the language, but not well enough to, work in an office or something like that. Yeah. And I don't have skills that people want in other jobs. So came back and here we are.
So you didn't move there married. You met your wife in Korea.
Yep.
Okay. And then came back. Nice.
Mm-hmm.
7 years is a long time.
Yeah. I was gone for a while. Yeah.
I think that's a pretty cool. I lived in Australia for a few years and I visited lots of other countries. I visited Japan for 3.5 weeks, almost a month.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, really have wanted to go back and stay there longer because it truly felt like a different country, whereas Australia was different, but similar to it's a first world English speaking country. There's definitely a lot of differences and there was some novelty. But when I went to Japan, I truly felt I went somewhere different. And I have been told that South Korea is similar. You really feel you're in a different place, a different country that runs different and everything's different.
Yeah. Once you get to a country where you can't read the signs on the street, then you're like, oh, this is different. Yeah.
You just went over there for a sense of adventure, just wanted to teach English and go somewhere different initially?
Yeah, it was basically that I hated my job in the US and I was like grasping for anything to leave that. I was a dog catcher before I moved to Korea. So that was a pretty fun job for a while. And then I decided that like I wanted to get out before a dog really gets me. I didn't have a lot of like I graduated from college, but like my degree is not super useful by itself. So I didn't have a lot of marketable skills, we'll say. But in order to teach English in Korea and in Japan and China, all you need is a bachelor's degree. It was pretty easy to go do that.
So you come back here, you're back into gaming.
Yeah.
And what year did you come back to America? You said a few years ago, right?
Yeah, 22.
Oh, so the COVID thing, you started your podcast in Korea. The
I
first,
did,
the
yeah.
top three podcasts.
Yeah, I was,
Okay.
doing podcasts this time of night for you all. But for me, I was waking up at 8 in the morning to do podcasts.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you started Tales from the Backlog in 2021. You
Mhm.
said 3 years. So you were still in Korea when you
Yep.
started it.
Mhm.
Okay. And you kept it going when you came over to America. So let's get into some of the stuff I've been asking more people at the end. Some of it I do will be retro, and some of it will be more based on your podcast. I think specifically when I have a podcaster on, I go a little bit, or excuse me, a gaming podcaster specifically. I want to go into a little bit more detail because I feel it's a bit of a commercial for your podcast so that people can understand your taste in gaming, and then they can decide like, hey, I want to listen to this guy talk more about games. We definitely covered a lot. What is the most emotional, which game elicited the strongest emotional response? That could be positive or negative emotional response.
I'm going to disregard being really fucking mad at video games when I answer this question because I have been pretty tilted at games I'm playing sometimes. Nier Automata probably got the strongest non-anger emotional response out of me.
Spoiler alert, tell me why.
It's not a moment in the story, it's the release during the credits in that song. And I think the song that plays in the credits of Nier Automata is a beautiful song. The way that they go through, because during the credits they play the song in four languages, including the made up one. And there's a couple of them, especially the Japanese vocalist is just given her all in that song. You're doing the bullet hell thing in the credits, and while that song is playing, and just like the everything that you've been through throughout that journey, because it's a really emotional story, but like there wasn't a part during the story where I was like crying or something like that. But during the credits, when that song is playing, and songs with vocals in credits can get this out of me, but it all just hits right at the end, or you let it all out right at the end in those credits. So I played that game twice. It happened both times. And a more recent game, the final scene in Like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who erased his name. This like the ninth Yakuza game I played. You have so much history with the character. I won't spoil what happens. I want people to play it. It's the shortest Yakuza game.
I've never played a single Yakuza game, so I'm a great maybe stand-in for many people in the audience. Try to help us understand why it was so impactful with some context without spoiling it.
Okay, so like I said, this is the ninth game in that series with that character, Kiryu. We're all the way from Yakuza 0 through Yakuza Like a Dragon, which is number 7 in the timeline, and then this is a Gaiden story that takes place between Yakuza 7 and 8. So this is number 9 of all the games that he has been a starring character in. So you have so much history with him. Yakuza games are not short. So you have lots of story, things that he's been through, sacrifices that he's made. And this scene at the end, in particular, plays on one of the biggest sacrifices that he made throughout the story. And it's the first time that, because Kiryu is known for being this really stoic character who, even through like the toughest or most emotional situations, he is the calm one for everybody else. But this is the time where he's alone. So you can see a different side of him. That's all I'll say in this scene.
So it really enjoy that moment. You would recommend you've got to play through all the previous games for that to truly pay off in the same way.
Not all of them. I think if you played if you just played Gaiden and really just took to heart what's going on in the story, then maybe it would work. If you played Yakuza 6 before that, then it would work as well. But I think the reason that things like that, once you get this deep into a series, and like people say the same thing about like the Trails series, where like you played so many games with these same characters that when something happens with those characters, you have so much history with them that moments hit harder because you've spent so much time with them. And it helps that in Yakuza, like the voice acting is incredible. The Japanese voice acting is incredible. They really sell the scene as well with that stuff. So that scene is like crazy. Talk to anyone who played that game, they'll know exactly like, hey, remember that you could just say remember that scene in Like a Dragon Gaiden and they'll be like, "Oh my god. Yeah. Yeah."
Okay. I know what you mean because there's other games that seems like have had similar impacts to me. I am curious though, what game has made you the most tilted, the most pissed?
Probably some From Software boss fights, honestly. I remember getting real mad at some fights in Sekiro, in particular. The first time I played Dark Souls, fighting Capra Demon, I got so mad I deleted my file and started a new game after like 3 months of being mad about it.
Fucking little alleyway and those stupid dogs. Oh my god.
Yeah, I would just go with those. Those are probably the one. Everything else where I would get really mad, it would be like if I got soft locked and like had to either restart the game or just like stop playing or something like that. Without taking too much time to think, I think those boss fights, some of them get me real mad because they're not why I'm playing those games. Again, I'm not playing them so that I can fight the same boss for 3 straight days and then overcome it. That's not why I'm here. So when there's one that's like blocking me from getting to the stuff I really want, it makes me extra upset.
What is the most disappointed you've been in a game that you were hyped for?
Ooh. I was pretty disappointed in Final Fantasy 13 when it first came out. I was very hyped for that game. And I bought it on release day on the 360, and it was just not what I thought it would be. So I was disappointed. I want to replay it because I haven't played it since then. Like with the right expectations, it might, I might find more to like there. But that's probably the one. This year, 2024, Dragon's Dogma 2 was a big disappointment for me.
We are very closely aligned. I was going to chime in on the last question, what game has made you the most mad? I was going to say Final Fantasy 13 on launch day because I felt betrayed. I've done this a few times. I get a little overzealous in my reaction, and I just threw the game away. Fuck you. Like, you guys bait and switched me. I did that with Kingdom Hearts 3, Final Fantasy 7 Remake, all Square games. Huh.
Yeah. Huh.
I have since enjoyed Final Fantasy VII Remake. It just took me some time to come around to the direction they took. But Dragon Dogma 2, I refunded that on Steam after like 3 hours. It was just really janky and just wasn't hitting for me.
Yeah, and I liked the original Dragon's Dogma a lot. To kind of like set the stage here, I finish almost every game that I play. The only things that I don't finish are like, if I just like turn on a retro game on an emulator just to check it out, I won't finish it most of the time. Even I do a bonus series on my Patreon where I try old retro games that I missed back in the day. Cause like I said, I never had an NES or a Super Nintendo or PlayStation 1. Like I missed so much, all the Sega stuff. I missed all that stuff. So I try a lot of those and I'll like try to beat them, but I don't end up beating a lot of them. I'm not going to beat Zombies Ate My Neighbors or something like that. But most things that I play, I finish. Even if I don't like them, I still finish them because I enjoy, most of the time, if they're long enough, I'm doing a podcast about them. And I really enjoy the critical process of like, I don't like this. Why don't I like this? Can I articulate in words why I don't like this? Or even why I don't think this is good? I really enjoy that process. So I finish most things. I got so bored with Dragon's Dogma 2, I started questioning like the way I'm using my time. And when I get to that point, I got to stop. So I put it down. It was like 20 hours into it. I put it down. I haven't even thought about picking it back up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because again, like I said, I finished most everything. So
yeah,
even if I'm kind of bored Or like, I think the story in Dragon's Dogma 2 is absolute trash. Somehow worse than the first game, because the first game barely had a story until the end. This one, they have stuff that I think they want you to care about, but it's just not good. So I did give it 20 hours and I was so bored. I was just like, I don't think that while playing an open world RPG, I should fall asleep. I think that's a bad sign for an open world action RPG. If I fall asleep, that's bad. And I fell asleep a couple times playing that game.
Who or what is the greatest antagonist in video games, or your favorite antagonist in a game?
Sin, Final Fantasy X.
Ooh. I'm glad. So Chris from Metro Hangover, which I bring up on almost every episode because I love that dude and I hang out with him online so much. I played 7, 8, and 9, and we did an episode on this podcast about those three. And then I was going to play 10, and he gave me some preface. We talked about 10 a little bit off the air, and I have historically been really, really critical, like outlandishly critical for the sake of humor on 10. I make fun of 10 all the time just to trigger Chris because he loves that game. I will say that the concept of Sin coming back as an adult and being able to understand more of the themes and what they were alluding to, or what I think they were alluding to. I guess I don't know how I interpreted a lot of the symbolism and things that I think are analogies in that game, and what Sin can stand in for, and the concepts that Sin can stand in for, and why it's his dad. And I think it's one of the coolest ideas and coolest antagonists as well. I went from hating that game to hating it and loving it. I still hate a lot about it. And it almost made me hate it more because there's so many cool ideas. I'm trying not to spoil it just in case someone hasn't played it, because I do think it's worth playing if you haven't. How do I say? Just the lore, not just the baseline narrative, but the world and lore and what those things can represent and symbolize. Specifically, Sin is so cool. One of the coolest scenarios I've ever run across in gaming, but executed in ways that I still just can barely stand to this day. So I have a strong love-hate relationship with that game, but I would agree. I think you're the only person who's ever said Sin for that question. And that is an antagonist. I think if you caught me on the right day, I might put in my top 5, top 3 as well.
It's interesting because Sin is, number one, Sin's not the ultimate, like, greatest antagonist in Final Fantasy X. Sin's more of a force, a recurring event almost. But the concept of it is so cool. And so like there's I love Kefka from Final Fantasy VI, and I love Gontar O'Dim from The Witcher 3. There's others that I'm blanking on right now. I like a lot of other villains that are more traditional, but Sin is so different from everything else. And like you said, like when you start getting into the themes of the game and what Sin is representing and the forces that are using Sin for their own gain, maybe all of that stuff is so interesting to me that Sin's the first thing that jumps into my head. Plus, like the opening cutscene in FF10 when Sin attacks the Blitzball game is like that absolutely blew me away the first time I saw it. I saw recently Jacob Geller did a really cool video basically going through the history of video games, talking about at the time what was the greatest looking game of all time. So like starting on computers from the 80s or early 90s all the way up through the PS5, we've said so many times this is the greatest looking game ever made. And then like 6 months later, a new game comes out that looks better. Final Fantasy X was one of those games. The first time I played it, it was the best looking game I had ever seen in 2006, not 2001. So that opening scene with Sin really made an impression, we'll say.
What is your favorite soundtrack?
Fuck, that's an impossible. I already said Nier Automata, so I won't say that, even though that's a like unassailable soundtrack in my opinion. I can't give a real answer for this, so I will give a soundtrack that's really good that no one ever talks about, and it's the soundtrack for Return of the Obra Dinn, which is
that game is great. We'll get into more like deep cut recommendations.
Yeah,
that is one I give out for a deep cut recommendation, just as a game. Yeah,
it's an amazing game, and the soundtrack is really, really good. And when we talk about soundtracks, I feel like, you and me, other like people in our circle, when we talk about best game soundtracks, a lot of us gravitate to JRPGs because the soundtracks are amazing pretty consistently. But no one ever talks about like the Return of the Obra Dinn soundtrack. And I think it's like wonderful and fits that game perfectly. They're catchy songs. They sound nautical and, you know, they're really cool.
I need to revisit that because I was wowed by other aspects of that game so much.
Oh yeah, it's like a perfect game. I love it.
It's one of the best games. I think it's overwhelmingly positive on Steam, which
Yeah.
is why I checked it out. This pretty rare for a game to be overwhelmingly positive, and
Mhm.
most of the time I like them. And
Yep.
Steam's return policy is so good. It's like if it's overwhelmingly positive, I'll put an hour and a half in, and before the 2 hour mark, I could decide if I want to return it or not. And
Yep.
that's one that I just ended up liking. So I need to revisit it because the soundtrack to me, I think it's a good sign when it doesn't stick out because it served its purpose and added to the experience without being distracting.
Mhm.
But I was so engrossed by other aspects of the game, I need to revisit that now under your recommendation because I don't remember much from it.
The soundtrack's not gonna blow you away, but I do think it's like perfect for that game. And
Yes.
no one ever talks about that game soundtrack. So there we go.
Talked about emotional moment, but what is your favorite narrative? It doesn't have to be positive or negative emotion, just best story.
Man, that's the hardest questions. I think the story in Xenogears is really good. I really love that story. It's super complex, but I think that it's neatly done. Like I didn't have a lot of unanswered questions at the end of it, despite it being like the wildest ride. So that's a really good one. I mean, I really like the story in Final Fantasy X, but we've already talked about that. A game that came out this year, 2024, it's called 1000 Times Resist. I has like an amazing story.
I'm
I think it's overwhelmingly positive on Steam. So yeah, it's the number 1000 then X Resist.
Oh, it's an indie horror game, it looks like.
Not horror, indie sci-fi, we'll say.
Oh, I like the art style.
Mm-hmm. It's a good looking game. It has a wonderful soundtrack. It's of all the games in 2024 that I've played this year, it's my favorite story by a mile.
1000 times resist. The number 1000x resist for those who are not watching the YouTube edit, there'll be footage of it we'll put up.
Mm-hmm.
It's fantastic. This is one of my favorite ones to ask. If Elon Musk or maybe Jeff Bezos was like, Dave, I really like your podcast. I think you're awesome. I'm going to give you an unlimited budget to make whatever game you want and hire whatever development house you want. What game would you make and who would you hire to make it?
Ooh, tough. I'm just going to answer with like the classic answer that I think I would love that has not been made yet. I really want a good open world Pokemon game, not Legends Arceus. I thought I really liked that game because it was the closest thing to this dream that I've had since like the year 2000 or something. I want think of the world of Breath of the Wild, but inhabited by Pokemon. I thought it would be cool when I first saw Pokken Tournament. I thought it would be really cool if like this hypothetical open world game had Pokken Tournament combat. This is why you would need unlimited money and resources because in order to build out like 200 characters with full move sets and things like that, that would be ridiculous. A big open world with, diverse, zones, diverse characters or Pokemon that live in those zones. That's a game that I would play day and date if it ever came out. I still play, I'm looking forward to the new Pokemon Legends ZA or whatever they're calling it game because it's going to be the closest thing to this thing that I've been waiting for. And I think it'll be fun, but they're not quite it. My dream game is impossible for even Nintendo would be like, that's too much, dude. What are you talking about? So you need like the billions of dollars and like fucking take 15 years, whatever you need, make it. Like I'll still be here. I will exercise more. I will eat healthy so I'm alive when it comes out. Like that's what I think that's my answer.
Who would you hire? What kind of art style would you want?
I would be happy with like the Breath of the Wild or like the Monolith Soft type
Okay.
art style. Because with Pokemon, there's so many different designs. You need it to be consistent, and I'm not, necessarily interested in it being like 8K photorealistic or something. I
Yeah.
don't think Pokemon would look good in that art style anyway.
Who is your favorite writer in the gaming industry, if you
That's a
have
good
one?
question. We don't often know who to credit with writing
That's why
unless
I
you,
like to ask it, is
yeah,
because
unless you go digging. So off the top of my head, I'll just say Tetsuya Takahashi
okay.
from the Xeno series. I really like, the stories and worlds that he and, working with his wife back in the day, the stories that they create. I think that the stories and world building that they put out are really, really good. Because I haven't played Xenosaga, but I have played Xenogears and all three Xenoblade games. And I think the world building and often the stories are like very, very good.
Was he the writer between the Xenosagas on PS2?
I think so. Yeah, I think he's been helming that series the entire time.
Okay. I thought that I was under the impression he was he worked on the previous games, but he wasn't the main writer until whatever one's on the Wii.
I can't remember if
I could be
he
wrong.
was the principal writer or if his wife, Kaori Tanaka, I think is her name. Soraya Saga is her pen name. I don't remember which of those is like the principal writer, but they're a writing team, or at least they were back in the day before she left the company, not him.
Who do you think is the best gaming director?
Oh, gaming director.
Maybe who has the most consistent output?
I forget the person's name who is working on the new Zelda games, but those have to be nightmares to coordinate with how complex they are. So shout out to that person whose name I forget. And then gotta shout out Hidetaka Miyazaki for this vision that comes through so strongly in all of the games that he directs. If you gave somebody Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3 blind and asked them to pick which game did the same person not direct, they would pick Dark Souls 2 because it's different.
Yeah.
And you can feel the difference that he was like more just kind of checking on that as they were making it. So yeah, big shout out. In like those games are so complicated. They have such big teams that directing all those moving pieces, maintaining this consistent focus on what is important to them. That's the sign of a good director, to keep everybody with the same vision. And I think that all of the Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, Elden Ring, all of those, they have that vision.
I also don't know who the game director is for the recent Zelda games. I don't even like Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. They're not for me. But the physics on Tears of the Kingdom, with all the different things you can build, knowing just a little bit and having some friends who are into development, like I know just the tiniest little bit of how difficult games are. I know they're extremely expensive and extremely difficult. These games have massive teams, like you said, that require massive amounts of coordination. And I spent some time on some Reddit threads and different NeoGAF forums where other devs were absolutely baffled on how Tears of the Kingdom can run on the Switch and how they pulled that off.
It's
wizardry.
I remember seeing when Tears of the Kingdom first dropped, because I follow a lot of game developers on Twitter, and it was that exact same thing where it was just literally person after person being like, how does this work? How did they do this? And on the least powerful console, and it still looks pretty good. The director's name is Hidemaru Fujibayashi. So big credit on both of those new Zelda games.
If you could have any guest on your podcast, who would it be?
See, there's a lot. Like I feel like there's a lot of like podcasters and journalists that I would really love to have on the show, but I feel like I got to reach bigger if I could have any guest,
dead or alive.
Could I have like, this is probably not like the real answer, but this is what I'm going to say so I don't spend too much time thinking. I know that Post Malone really likes video games, and I have watched enough interviews with him where he seems like he'd be really fun to talk with. So it would be really cool to have Post Malone on to talk about a video game. I'm not the biggest fan. I like some of his songs, but he seems like a really nice person. Mm-hmm. Like when doing interviews, he's super like polite, and he knows what he's talking about when he's talking about things that he likes. So yeah, that would be the answer.
I think that's not what I was expecting. I'm really happy because I was expecting, a developer or a voice, someone in the gaming industry.
Yeah.
That's what I usually get. I like that answer for a few reasons. One, Post Malone's main residence is in Utah, and I will say that I've never met him, but I know many people who have met him, so secondhand stories,
Mhm.
and he's apparently as cool and as nice as you think he is.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Like
Yeah.
I haven't heard anyone say that he's a dick, and every interview or Hot Ones or whatever I've ever seen him on, it just seems like it'd be really fun. And he loves video games, so that's the common ground.
He was on Rogan talking about Elden Ring, specifically the music, and
Uh-huh.
that he was just genuinely nerding out the way you and I would nerd out about.
Yeah, that's exactly. So like it might be an unorthodox answer. Like I would love to have like Miyamoto on the podcast to talk about video
Yeah.
games or something, but like it's the unorthodox answer, but I think it'd be really fun.
That's badass. What is your ultimate favorite gaming memory? Could be playing with friends, it could be a moment in a game, the best memory you have that involves games.
I have already said two of the biggest ones. The Breath of the Wild one is probably the biggest one. And then playing games with my college buddies, just playing all those party games. Those are two that really stick out. So I'll say a third one. My high school friends and I would have sleepovers, and we would play through Ocarina of Time, like just straight through, all like overnight. And we'd start a file, we'd name Link something funny, and then just play through and like play the entire game, just play it for like 16 hours straight or whatever. Just laugh at Navi calling Link a bitch or something like that. Like things we thought we were really funny when we were 15. Those are really, really good memories. Just thinking about those nights, and those are still my buddies that I do my other podcast with. So those are things that we share.
I think that I am still a 15-year-old because I'm playing through Dragon Quest V right now, and I named my character Ya Boy, Boi. And I'm 15 hours in and I'm still laughing at when people.
Yeah. I just saw a thing on Instagram where someone named their Pokemon "Oh shit he." And so every time the Pokemon does something, it says, "Oh shit, he used Fire Blast. Oh shit, he's evolving." And I like that made me laugh so much. Yeah, I'm with you, man. It's still funny. Like
It's still
I
fun.
probably wouldn't name Link bitch anymore, but like it's still funny to name characters that stuff. I'll name Gary Oak ass face every time.
Can you please give us, it could be top 3, top 5, top 10, however many you feel are worth mentioning, your favorite deep cuts, games that are lesser known that people should spend the time to check out? It can be from any time in history, retro or modern.
I already mentioned 1000 Times Resist, which has gotten buzz around, journalists and some podcasts and stuff, but I don't think it's gotten enough attention for how good it is. So I mentioned that earlier. From Software fans should check out Kingsfield 4 and Shadow Tower Abyss on the PlayStation 2. They're very good games, especially Kingsfield 4 is like legitimately a very good game. They're not bringing it forward for whatever reason. Shadow Tower Abyss never got localized, so you have to emulate a fan translation or speak Japanese. But it's weird. It's like Kingsfield, but you have guns. It's very strange, but it's a cool game. So that's a deep cut for you. Let's give one I'm playing right now. That'll be on the podcast in a couple months. I'm playing a game right now called Void Stranger, that is a Sokoban puzzle game, but it has like a JRPG story. So you'll do some puzzles, and then your character will take a nap, and like in their dreams, a story will play out. So you have to like puzzles. You have to like Sokoban puzzles, block pushing, that type of thing. But the story's cool. The music is insanely good. And then it's one of those games like a Tunic or something that's full of secrets. So if you like to poke around and take notes on things that you found and try and connect them to things later on, this is a game that's full of things like that. and I think it came out last year. It's not perfect. It's pretty frustrating sometimes, but it's like undeniably cool and compelling. And I'm mentioning it because I've been playing it a lot this past week, and when I'm working, I'm thinking about Void Stranger. And that doesn't happen with every game that I play. It doesn't happen with every game that I love. But like when I'm working, I'm like, I got this thing I'm going to do. As soon as I'm done with this task, I'm turning on my Steam Deck and I'm going to try this thing out. And I love it when games give me that. So I'll shout that game out.
Any others before we wrap it up?
One of the cool things about like doing the podcast the way that I do it, I'm not reviewing the newest, hottest games. I'm reviewing the stuff that I play because I want to play it. Devotion is kind of a deep cut because you can't buy it on any storefront. You have to go to their website to buy it and download it. It's by Red Candle Games, who made Nine Souls this year, 2024. They also made Detention.
I have Nine Souls. I haven't played it, but I did buy it.
Same developer. This is a first-person psychological horror game, and it's one of the best horror games I've ever played. And because of a controversy that got the Chinese government on their back, this game was delisted from every single storefront, and they had to basically build a storefront on their website to sell it. It's still the only place you can buy it. Like, it's not illegal or anything like that. Like, they're fine. They're obviously still making games, but just due to this controversy, this game got buried, and it's a real shame because it's very, very good.
What was the controversy? Because I saw some headlines, but I don't know what happened.
There was an asset in the game's, art textures that compared Xi Jinping, I think that's his name, Li Jinping, the Chinese president or whatever, to Winnie the Pooh. They're a Taiwanese company. I don't know if it was a political statement or if it was just a joke. They said it was a placeholder asset that got skipped when they were doing their final pass or whatever. But it made it in the game. And that is a comparison that the Chinese government does not take too kindly to. They put a bunch of pressure on Steam and GOG and all the other storefronts saying, like, you can't sell games in China if you don't take this game off. So they took the game off. And it was a whole big thing. And I'm glad the company survived because they're really good at making games. That was the controversy. So now you can buy it from their website, the Red Candle Games website. It's under the radar because like you'll never see it on like the trending on Steam or overwhelmingly positive on Steam, but it's very good.
Yeah, I'm going to check that out. I remember some headlines about a game that pissed off the CCP and got delisted.
Yeah.
But we're so inundated by information that went in my head and then disappeared until you brought it up.
The gaming industry has terrible news every single day. So
yeah, that's so true. Yeah, I'm watching some of the footage. We'll put it up on the YouTube edit. It looks awesome. And then the YouTube video, I'm looking at Super Eye Patch Wolf. I don't know who this person is.
Oh, good channel.
Yeah, they almost have 2 million, so they must be good. And the video is called Devotion, the most disturbing game you cannot play. And it looks like towards the end, they are showing off this specific asset. So you can see that if you are interested. The Winnie the Pooh comparison. All right, let's give you your final pitch on the podcast, where people can find you, how they can support you, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So thank you again for inviting me on here. I've been looking forward to this. And thank you again for that Metal Gear Solid 2 conversation that people really enjoyed. I enjoyed doing that. So if people want to find me again, I'm the host of Tales from the Backlog, which is everywhere you listen to podcasts, unless it's some super secret gaming memories place. Probably not there, but everywhere else you can find me. And again, every episode is one game with a different guest. I am the only permanent member of the podcast. And we do the deep dive. We talk about the gameplay. We talk about the story. We talk about the music, the art, all of that stuff. And we do all of that with no spoilers for a while, sometimes an hour, sometimes longer with no spoilers. And then we warn you when spoilers start. Every single episode is like this, so that if you haven't played, you can listen to any episode of my show, even those games that people say you can't talk about without spoilers, like Outer Wilds and Tunic and Pony Island and stuff like that. Every episode of my show is like this. You can talk about those games with no spoilers because we do it. And then after that, we do a dedicated spoiler discussion where we talk about the plot, we talk about the themes, we talk about things like that. They're long podcasts. So if you like long podcasts, the average one is 2 hours long. That's Tales from the Backlog. I have about 130 games on the show. And then I also have discussion episodes. Some topics that we've done in the past are how to get into horror games, because I used to hate horror games and now I love them. So how did that happen? We had a discussion about that. We had a discussion about if video games need to be fun at all, which was I thought was a really good discussion. So we have those episodes too. So that's the show. That's Tales from the Backlog.
And what are I am a full disclosure, I'm a Patreon. I think I'm the lowest tier, and I support because I like you and I like your podcast.
Well, thank you.
For those I don't know at the top of my head, what are the perk options if someone wants to support you further?
Oh, sure. So on Patreon, every patron starting at $2 can vote in monthly polls for a game that I do on the show. Sometimes you can, some people can submit games for those. Other times I pick the games, but everyone can vote in those starting at $2. I do bonus episodes sometimes. Every year, for example, I do a Game of the Year episode on the main feed, and then the patrons get the best not new game that I played this year episode. So I do bonus episodes from time to time. At $5, you get my retro gaming series, a monthly show called Tales from the Way Backlog, where I play at least a 30-year-old game for the first time. Because again, we've talked through my history. There's a lot of stuff I did not own when I was younger. So I'm playing those things. Past games on that show, I did, and that's me solo. So they're about 15 to 25-minute episodes. I did Zelda 2, Mega Man 2, Castlevania 2. We had a run on sequels for a while. Zombies Ate My Neighbors. Ultima, the first Ultima game, I did that on Tales from the Way Backlog. That was interesting.
That's going to be a slog for sure.
It was I didn't beat it, but I did have fun with it for a while. So that's the $5 tier. And then the last tier is $10. And at that level, you can submit the games for the polls. Every other month right now, we're doing those patrons can submit those games for the polls. So that's fun. I think those people enjoy doing that. And it spices up what I'm covering on the podcast for sure.
Did they try to troll you and make you play games that are shitty?
They don't, because they have to submit things from my backlog list, which is sounds limiting, but it's like there's almost 400 games on that list. So people find stuff. You know how it is, like you game on PC, you just collect free games every single month and just build up this insane list of things you'll never have time to play. Even if you don't buy anything, it still happens. So,
I still buy them and just like, why am I buying this? I don't know. It's on sale and I've heard it's good. And
yeah,
maybe one day I'll play. Probably not.
Well, I do that too. And then emulation. So yeah.
Yeah. Sweet, dude. I think that's it. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap this bad bitch up?
Other than what I've said, and other than thanking you again for taking the time to talk with me, I do another podcast. It's called a Top 3 podcast, where we do top 3 lists, and we do draft episodes. So like recently, the community submitted a bunch of food, and then we drafted from that our last meals. So it's a comedy show. So like if you think that I could be funny or associate with funny people, that's a show you could check out. But Tales from the Backlog is like, that's the weekly show. That's the gaming show. That's the most relevant. But just shouting out that I do another podcast because I'm an insane person.
Yeah, I do a podcast, another podcast with Chris I'm working on, Meme Coin Crypto Project, a business, a music project. So
yeah,
my life, I get it. I think if you have a certain type of personality where you enjoy creating and enjoy other people's creations so much that that inspires you to at least talk about it. Mm-hmm. I find that a lot of us have a hard time not doing more things than we like. Our appetite's bigger than our stomach, so to speak.
Yeah. If you're having a good time doing it, it's really hard to say no.
It's really hard to say no. Yeah. So I think that's a good thing though. I think it's better to be busy than to be idle. Please check out all the applicable links are going to be in the podcast description, in the YouTube video description. Check out Tales from the Backlog, Top 3 podcasts. Remember, share the good news of the gaming gospel and ye shall be blessed. I say these things in the name of me, the Mother, the Father, the Coach, you, the Son, and Carmack, the Holy Ghost. Amen, and enjoy the games.